The office fell quiet when her old phone buzzed again. Kate leaned over, laughing loud enough for everyone to hear. "Careful, Sophie, that thing might explode." But Sophie didn't laugh. She answered the call, and when the voice on the other end said, "Is this Sophie? This is President Trump," the entire room stopped breathing. "Welcome to Dignity Tales. Let's uncover what really happened." Sophie sat at her desk, tapping her old phone against the wooden surface, the device worn with scratches and fading buttons. It was an odd relic in a world that moved on sleek, glittering screens. The phone buzzed with a notification, but Sophie's fingers hesitated before unlocking it. Most people would have upgraded years ago, but Sophie liked it this way. Simple, reliable. She didn't need the latest tech to keep up with everyone else. Across the office, the usual chatter buzzed through the air, mixed with the occasional snickers and quiet murmurs. Sophie felt the eyes on her. A few too many stares, but she didn't mind. It wasn't the first time. She adjusted her glasses and kept her head down, pretending not to notice the whispers. "Hey, Soph." Kate, her co-worker from across the room, called out with a smile. "You finally get a new phone yet? This one's looking a little vintage." Kate's voice carried more than a hint of mockery. The others at their desks glanced over, some hiding smiles behind their hands, others openly sneering. Sophie's smile remained steady. "It works fine," she replied, her voice calm. But she knew, without a doubt, that Kate's teasing wasn't just about the phone. It never was. It was about the way Sophie didn't fit into the picture they'd all painted of what success, what life should look like. "Fine? It's practically prehistoric," Kate laughed, her words echoing through the open office. Sophie felt the sting, but she didn't react. She didn't need to. She didn't need their validation. But somewhere, deep down, the doubts crept in. Was it wrong to hold on to something so simple when everyone else seemed to be moving at breakneck speed, upgrading, climbing, winning? Her phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen, a message from her sister, Caroline. Sophie smiled softly. Maybe simplicity wasn't such a bad thing after all. Sophie stepped into the break room, her old phone still in hand. The fluorescent lights above hummed softly as the scent of coffee lingered in the air. She nodded to a few colleagues who were gathered around the counter, engaged in casual conversation. Her presence didn't go unnoticed, however. She could feel the shift in the room the moment she entered. "Hey, Sophie, you get the new iPhone yet?" Greg called out, his voice more than a little loud. He leaned against the counter, an amused glint in his eyes, his fingers tapping rhythmically on his brand-new, shiny device. "Or are you still rocking that thing from the Stone Ages?" Laughter rippled through the group, echoing off the cold, tiled walls. Sophie's cheeks flushed, but she didn't let herself show it. She tried to keep her gaze fixed on the microwave, pretending to adjust the coffee mug in her hand. "I'm fine with what I have," Sophie replied, her voice steady, though the words felt hollow. "Fine," Greg repeated, a laugh escaping him. "That thing's practically a relic. What do you even do with it? Text? Play Snake?" He was trying to be funny, but Sophie could hear the condescension in his tone. The others joined in. Sarah raised an eyebrow, her perfectly manicured nails tapping her cup of coffee. "I can't believe you're still using that. Doesn't it break every other week?" The teasing continued, sharp and insistent. Sophie's stomach tightened, but she held her ground. She felt like a stranger in her own skin, like an outsider in the very space she had worked in for years. They didn't get it, didn't understand that it wasn't about the phone. It was never about the phone. She set her mug down and turned to leave, but as she passed by Greg, his voice followed her. "Guess it's better than paying for a new one every year," he said with a wink, as if his words were a clever jab. Sophie didn't respond. Instead, she kept walking, her old phone burning in her pocket, heavier than it had ever been. That evening, as Sophie sat in her quiet apartment, the weight of the day pressed on her. The laughter from the break room still echoed in her mind, sharper with each passing hour. She had always prided herself on being indifferent to others' opinions, but today, the ridicule had hit a little harder. She picked up her old phone and stared at it for a moment, her fingers grazing the cracked screen. It buzzed suddenly, breaking her thoughts. The screen flashed with an unfamiliar number, and Sophie's heart skipped. She rarely received calls, and never from unknown numbers. The moment stretched long, like a breath held too tightly. For a second, she thought about ignoring it, but something urged her to pick up. "Hello." Her voice felt strange in the stillness of the room, tentative and uncertain. There was a long pause on the other end before the voice came through, deep and calm, with an authority that sent a shiver down Sophie's spine. "Is this Sophie Winters?" The voice asked. "Yes, who's this?" Her breath caught in her throat, the uncertainty rising. The voice paused again, and Sophie thought she might hear a click or a faint sound that would reveal it as a prank. But didn't come. Instead, the voice continued, now more deliberate. "Do you have any idea what you're holding on to?" Sophie's pulse quickened. "Excuse me. I'm not sure if you understand the magnitude of what's happening, but you'll soon see. Trust me, you're about to be in the middle of something bigger than you can imagine." Sophie felt a chill race through her. Her grip tightened on the phone, her thumb brushing the edges of the cracked screen. "Who are you?" she asked again, the words coming out sharper, the confusion and fear bubbling to the surface. The voice didn't answer. Instead, it left a final cryptic line, "Just wait. You'll know soon enough." Then the line went dead. Sophie stood there, phone pressed her ear, staring at the blank screen, feeling the weight of the words sink into her bones. The next morning, Sophie woke with a gnawing sense of unease. The strange call from last night lingered in her thoughts like an unresolved melody. Her mind kept returning to the words she couldn't shake. "You'll know soon enough." She tried to tell herself it was just a prank, that there was nothing more to it, but her gut told her otherwise. There was something about the voice, something in the way the words were delivered that felt too deliberate, too real. As she prepared for work, Sophie felt like she was moving through a fog. She dressed in her usual understated attire, faded jeans, a simple cardigan, and grabbed her phone, the familiar weight of it both comforting and disconcerting. The phone buzzed in her pocket as she stepped outside. It wasn't the usual morning messages from friends or family. This one was different, an email from an address she didn't recognize. The subject line was simple but striking. "The change is coming." Sophie's hands trembled as she tapped the screen, her mind racing with possibilities. The email was brief, almost cryptic, but clear enough to stir her curiosity. It spoke of a choice, one that could shift the course of her life in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. The message warned her of hidden forces at play, forces that had noticed her, and that she was about to be caught up in something much larger than herself. A few words stuck out: opportunity, truth, courage. Her heart began to pound as a sense of destiny wrapped around her, tightening like a knot. The message ended with a single line that made Sophie's breath catch. "The president is waiting for your response." Sophie pulled her hand away from the phone, as though it had burned her. She glanced around, half expecting someone to be watching her. It was absurd. How could this be real? And yet, there was a pull in her chest, an undeniable force urging her to follow the path, to lean into the unknown. She stood there for a moment, taking in the quiet of the morning. And for the first time, Sophie allowed herself to think, maybe it's time for something more. Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed overnight. She kept glancing at her phone as if it might hold the answers she was desperate to find. The cryptic email still sat unread in her inbox, but something told her the truth wasn't in those words alone. She had to do something. She had to take action. That afternoon, during her lunch break, Sophie sat alone in the park outside her office building, the sun warming the concrete beneath her. She pulled the phone from her pocket and stared at it, the worn edges almost comforting. She had always avoided technology's clamor for attention, but now it felt like the phone had its own presence, a quiet urgency that hummed just beneath the surface. With shaking hands, Sophie unlocked the phone and scrolled through the apps she rarely used. Everything seemed normal at first: her social media accounts, the weather app, her calendar. But then, her finger hovered over the phone's settings. A small, blinking icon caught her eye. A new, hidden folder she'd never seen before. No label, just a faint outline where it shouldn't be. Her curiosity overcame her hesitation. She tapped the folder, and it opened with a soft click. Inside, there were just a few files, documents, some images, and a video. The files were encrypted, marked by strings of numbers and letters that meant nothing to her. Sophie's pulse quickened. This wasn't normal. She had no idea how the folder had appeared, but she could feel its weight pressing on her. She tapped the first file, a document with a strange title. As it opened, the words were almost too familiar, as if she had read them before, though she couldn't remember when. It was a list, names, dates, and cryptic notes. Her name was on it, highlighted in bold. Her breath caught in her throat. Sophie quickly shut the phone, as if the device might turn on her. She stood up, her heart hammering in her chest. The world around her felt too small now, too ordinary, and her phone had just opened a door to something far beyond her understanding. She had no idea what was happening, but one thing was clear. Her life was about to change. Sophie couldn't stop thinking about the hidden folder, the documents with her name boldly highlighted. Her mind raced, each thought colliding with the next as she paced the quiet corner of the park. She had tried to shake off the overwhelming feeling that something monumental was shifting, but it clung to her, relentless and undeniable. The familiar hum of her phone buzzed again in her pocket. Sophie froze. Her first instinct was to ignore it, to bury herself in the mundane distractions of the day, but something told her she couldn't. She pulled the phone out, her hand trembling slightly, and saw another unknown number on the screen. She hesitated for a moment, then answered, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Hello, Sophie." The voice on the other end was calm, measured. A voice she didn't recognize, yet somehow familiar. "You've seen it, haven't you?" Sophie's heart skipped. "What is this? Who are you?" she demanded, trying to steady her breath. "It's bigger than you think," the voice continued, almost soothing. "Everything you've been told, everything you thought you knew, it's all part of something much larger. You've been selected. The phone, the folder, it's all a part of the process." Sophie's chest tightened. She could barely process the words. "Selected for what?" "You'll know soon enough," the voice replied. "But for now, we need you to understand one thing. Your life, as you've known it, is about to change. This is not just about a phone, not just about a call. You're being called to something bigger, Sophie. Something that will demand more of you than you can imagine." Sophie's breath hitched. She stood there, staring at the phone, as though it held the answers to questions she hadn't even asked. "Why me?" she whispered. The voice paused, then responded, its tone suddenly more intense. "Because you've been living on the sidelines, watching the world change around you. It's time you stepped into it. The world is shifting, Sophie. You're a part of it, whether you're ready or not." The line went dead, leaving Sophie standing there, caught between fear and the undeniable pull of something far beyond her understanding. The world, indeed, was shifting, and Sophie was standing right in the middle of it. Sophie sat in her apartment that evening, the phone lying heavy in her hand. The silence of the room felt suffocating. She had gone over the call from earlier in her mind 100 times, trying to make sense of it, but the more she thought, the less she understood. She couldn't deny the pull, the feeling that she was being drawn into something bigger than herself. But what? And why her? As she stared at the phone, the screen suddenly blinked, lighting up with a new notification. It was an email, this time from the same untraceable address. Her heart skipped. She opened it immediately. The subject line read simply, "The invitation." The email was short, cryptic, and unsettling. It contained only a single line of text. "Meet me tomorrow at the pier. 3 p.m. You're ready." The message was signed with a strange symbol, something that resembled a stylized compass. No other instructions, no explanation, just the simple, chilling command to show up. Sophie felt a surge of panic rush through her. She had been living her life quietly, keeping to herself, avoiding attention. And now this? An invitation into something she didn't understand? She closed the phone and ran her hands through her hair, trying to steady herself. This couldn't be real. She didn't know who was behind it, or what they wanted. And yet, the email felt urgent. Real. She couldn't explain it, but deep down, she knew it wasn't a mistake. Her mind raced. The pier? It seemed so random, so far removed from everything that was familiar to her. But as the minutes ticked by, Sophie realized that for the first time in a long while, she felt a strange kind of clarity. She didn't know where this path would lead, but something told her that stepping away from her quiet, controlled life would be the only way to find out what was really going on. She stood up, the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. Tomorrow, 3 p.m. She had no choice but to go. Whatever it was, she was already in too deep. The next day felt like a blur. Sophie's mind churned with questions as she made her way to the pier, the sound of her footsteps heavy against the concrete. She had never been there before. It was quiet, isolated, just a stretch of old docks and a few fishing boats swaying gently in the water. She checked her watch. It was 2:45 p.m. Her heart pounded in her chest, the uncertainty making her feel lightheaded. The sun was starting to dip low, casting long shadows over the water. Sophie wrapped her cardigan tighter around her shoulders, trying to ward off the evening chill that settled in. There was no one around. She paced along the edge of the pier, glancing up at every sound, every movement, half expecting someone to jump out at her from the shadows. At exactly 3 p.m., a figure emerged from behind a row of fishing boats. He was tall, dressed in a dark jacket that seemed to absorb the fading light. His face was obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat, but Sophie felt his presence before she saw him clearly. Her heart skipped again, this time for an entirely different reason. The stranger's posture, his slow, deliberate steps, it was as if he had known she would be here all along. When he came closer, he stopped just a few feet away from her, not speaking immediately. Sophie's breath hitched, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. The eyes that locked onto hers were piercing, cold, yet strangely familiar. There was something in them that told her this wasn't a coincidence. This was all meant to happen. "You came." The man finally spoke, his voice low and steady, like someone accustomed to waiting for others to make the first move. His words weren't an accusation, but a statement, as if he already knew her decision. Sophie opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. The question that had been hanging in the air since last night suddenly felt irrelevant. Whatever was happening, whatever this was real, and she was already a part of it. Sophie stood frozen, the man's presence overwhelming in the quiet of the pier. The air between them felt thick, charged with an unspoken understanding. The seconds stretched long, filled with a weight that made her stomach tighten. She had come here, yes, but now that she was face to face with the reality of it, doubt flickered in her mind. The man didn't speak again, just watched her with those cold, unwavering eyes, waiting. Sophie wanted to ask him who he was, why he had called her here. But the words seemed pointless now. She already knew, deep down, that there was something bigger at play. The phone, the hidden folder, the mysterious emails. This was all leading to something she couldn't escape. Her life had already been rewritten without her permission. "I don't understand any of this," Sophie said finally, her voice sounding small in the vastness of the pier. She could hear the uncertainty in her words, the hesitance she couldn't quite shake. "Why me? Why now?" The man's lips curved slightly, as if he had anticipated the question. "You've been selected because you've been watching, Sophie. You've been on the sidelines, observing the world around you, waiting for something, anything, to change. But change doesn't happen from the sidelines. It happens when you step into it, when you decide to act." Sophie felt a chill run down her spine, the truth of his words sinking in. She had always been quiet, content to let life unfold around her. But for the first time, she realized she had been waiting for someone to push her into something bigger, something that would force her to face the life she had been running from. "You're ready," he continued, "but you have to make the choice. You can walk away, return to your life, and forget all of this, or you can step forward. But once you do, there's no going back." Sophie's breath caught. The decision was hers. The weight of it hung heavily, but as she stood there, facing the unknown, she knew what she had to do. She wasn't afraid anymore. "I'm ready," she whispered. The man nodded, his expression unreadable. And in that moment, Sophie knew everything was about to change. The man gave her a single, measured nod, as if confirming her decision, but he didn't speak again. Sophie's heart raced as the silence between them thickened. She had stepped into something far beyond her understanding, but now, in the stillness of the pier, she felt an odd sense of purpose beginning to emerge. "I need to know more," she said, her voice firmer now. "What is this? Who are you?" The questions had been building inside her, and now that she had made the choice to move forward, she needed answers. She couldn't follow blindly anymore, not when everything she had known was being turned upside down. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped aside, gesturing toward the end of the pier. Sophie looked at him, confused. "Come with me," he finally said. "I'll introduce you to someone who can explain things better than I can." Her mind raced with possibilities, none of them pleasant. Still, she followed, trusting that she had already stepped into something irreversible. As they walked, the sound of their footsteps echoed through the quiet, deserted area, until they reached a small, unassuming boat tethered to the dock. It was plain, nothing special, just a simple craft waiting. "Get in," the man instructed, his tone calm. Sophie hesitated for a moment, then stepped into the boat, settling onto the worn seat. As she did, she noticed a figure standing at the edge of the boat, looking out toward the horizon. The figure turned as they approached, and Sophie froze. It was Daniel, the young salesman from Boston Luxury Motors. The same one who had shown her the Azure Coupe. The same one who had respected her despite the other's mockery. His eyes widened when he saw her, and for a moment, there was a flash of recognition, of something unspoken passing between them. He was here, in the middle of all this? "Daniel?" Sophie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled a little sheepishly. "Didn't expect to see you here either," he said. "But I think I'm here to help you, Sophie. And you're going to need all the help you can get." Sophie's chest tightened as everything she thought she knew about the situation cracked open. An ally. She hadn't expected this, but maybe it was exactly what she needed. The boat rocked gently as it made its way away from the dock, the wind picking up as they headed toward an isolated part of the coast. Sophie sat in silence, her mind still reeling from the unexpected appearance of Daniel, who now sat across from her, his gaze steady, but his expression thoughtful. "You're probably wondering why I'm here," Daniel said after a moment, his voice breaking the tension. "I didn't expect to be part of all this either, but, well, I guess we're both in the same boat now." Sophie looked at him, her confusion deepening. "What do you mean? You were at the dealership. Why are you?" "I've been watching," Daniel interrupted, his eyes meeting hers with a calm intensity. "Not in a creepy way, I swear. But I've been part of this, whatever this is, for longer than you think. And I've been trying to figure out how to make a real difference, not just sit back and let the system keep running the way it is." Sophie's breath caught in her throat. "You're involved in this? With whatever's been going on?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, but not the way you think. I've been on the inside, learning, trying to understand the bigger picture. And now you're here. So, this is where the training begins." Sophie frowned, her brow furrowing. "Training? What kind of training?" Daniel reached into a small backpack beside him, pulling out a thick folder filled with papers. "This," he said, handing it to her. "It's everything you need to understand. Every step you take from here will be important. This isn't just about following orders anymore. It's about you figuring out how to use your instincts, your intelligence, and your courage." Sophie took the folder, feeling the weight of it in her hands. She opened it slowly, scanning the pages, her eyes darting over diagrams, codes, and instructions that made her head spin. This is insane." "Yeah," Daniel said with a wry smile, "but it's the reality now, and you're going to need to be ready for whatever comes next." Sophie's pulse quickened. She didn't know if she was ready, but she had no choice now. The journey had begun. Sophie sat in the dimly lit room, the folders spread out before her like a map of a world she had no idea existed. Daniel had left her to go through the contents alone, and though the silence felt heavy, Sophie found herself grateful for the time to process everything. The words on the pages weren't like anything she had ever seen before. Encrypted messages, names she didn't recognize, and coordinates to locations that made no sense. She turned the pages slowly, her fingers grazing over the carefully marked sections. A series of photographs caught her attention. In one, there was a man she didn't recognize, tall, with sharp features, standing in front of a building she didn't know. The date on the bottom of the photo was circled in red. April 15th, 2025. A chill ran down her spine. The date matched the one from the mysterious email. She flipped through the folder, her heart beginning to race as pieces of the puzzle slowly started to fit together. It wasn't just about the phone or the strange messages. It was about something much larger. A network. A web of influence and power that stretched farther than she had ever imagined. The next section contained detailed profiles on several people, each with a connection to a different part of the world's financial, political, and social systems. Sophie felt the weight of their positions, their power, as she read their names. There were politicians, businessmen, and even military leaders, and each one seemed connected to a hidden agenda, a plan that no one was meant to uncover. But Sophie was uncovering it now. Her mind reeled as she skimmed through more pages, her hands trembling as the enormity of the situation began to dawn on her. The truth was darker than she could have imagined. This wasn't just about wealth or power, it was about control. The people in these documents weren't just trying to influence global events. They were manipulating them, pulling strings in ways that affected the lives of millions without them ever knowing. Sophie closed the folder with a soft thud. It was clear now. She wasn't just a part of this. She was at the center of it, and there was no turning back. Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that everything was spiraling faster than she could comprehend. The names in the folder, the mysterious symbols, the connections between high-profile figures. It was like a web of power so tightly woven, there was no escape from it. But it wasn't until she reached the final page that she found something that made her stop cold. There, scrawled in the margins of a seemingly innocuous document, was a name that sent a shockwave through her entire being: Donald Trump. She blinked, her eyes scanning the page again to make sure she hadn't imagined it. The document was a detailed timeline of events, names, and locations connected to a series of covert operations. And nestled in the middle of it was Trump's name, underlined twice, his involvement noted in bold letters. Sophie's heart hammered in her chest. The document didn't go into details, but it was clear. Somehow, Trump was connected to the same shadowy network that had drawn her in. But how? What did his name have to do with all of this? She grabbed her phone, her hands shaking as she searched for the latest news. Her mind raced as she skimmed through article after article, piecing together snippets of information. He had been involved in business dealings with the people in the documents. Some of them she recognized from the photos, others from the profiles. There were rumors of backroom deals, financial agreements, and political maneuverings, but nothing concrete, nothing that explained the full scope of the connection. Sophie felt her stomach twist. This was bigger than she'd thought. She had no idea how deep the rabbit hole went, but the fact that Trump's name was tied to this network was unsettling. She had no more. Her mind snapped back to the file, the pictures, the coded messages. She needed to speak to Daniel. She needed answers. She had been caught in something far beyond what she had ever imagined, and now, the name of a former president was dangling before her like a key to the final door. Sophie closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. She was in this now. There was no turning back. And whatever happened next, she would have to face it head on. Sophie stood in the small apartment, the weight of the file still pressing on her mind. She had been pacing for what felt like hours, her thoughts racing in every direction. The phone buzzed in her hand, snapping her from her thoughts. It was a text message from Daniel. "Meet me now. I have something important to show you." Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to reach out so soon, but the urgency in a message was impossible to ignore. Sophie quickly grabbed her jacket and headed out the door. Her mind couldn't stop churning as she walked to the spot they had agreed to meet. She had so many questions, so many pieces that didn't fit. She had to know more about the Trump connection, about the people pulling the strings, and most of all, about her role in it all. By the time she arrived at the small cafe where Daniel had asked to meet, her hands were clammy, her pulse racing. She scanned the room quickly, searching for him. He was sitting in the corner, looking uncharacteristically tense. Sophie made her way over to the table, her mind still spinning from the revelations she had uncovered. You found it, didn't you? Daniel said before she could speak, his voice low, almost wary. Sophie nodded, sitting down across from him. I found Trump's name. I don't understand. How is he connected to all of this? Daniel's eyes darkened. You're not the only one asking that question, but it's bigger than you think. You've already stumbled into a world where people like him are the puppeteers, controlling everything from the shadows. Before Sophie could respond, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. She glanced at the screen. The number was unknown. A deep instinct told her to answer. She pressed the phone to her ear, her breath catching in her throat. Is this Sophie? The voice on the other end asked. It was low, calm, unmistakably familiar. Yes, she said, her voice trembling. Good, the voice replied, almost warmly. We need to talk, and I think you're ready to listen. Sophie's heart pounded. There was no turning back now. The voice on the other end of the line was steady, calculated, and all too familiar. Sophie's heart raced as she struggled to stay composed, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She glanced at Daniel, who was watching her intently, his brow furrowed as if he already knew who the caller was. I'm listening, Sophie finally said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. There was a brief pause before the voice responded, calm and authoritative. Good. You've already seen the file, I assume. Sophie nodded, even though she knew the caller couldn't see her. I've seen it. What does this all mean? Why are you involving me? The voice chuckled softly. Because you've been watching, Sophie. You've been sitting on the sidelines, waiting for something to change. Now you're part of it, whether you like it or not. Her mind spun. Part of it. What did that even mean? She had thought she was just uncovering pieces of conspiracy, not being pulled into the heart of it. You're in a position to make a difference, the voice continued, sensing her confusion. But you need to understand something. We need you to act. Now, what you've learned so far is only the surface. The people you've uncovered, the ones with all the power, are moving closer to their goal. We can't let that happen. Sophie glanced at Daniel, who nodded silently, his expression unreadable. He had known about this all along. Your mission is simple, Sophie. Find the leverage. Use it. We need you to gather the pieces that they've left behind and deliver them where they need to go. The people involved are too dangerous, and you've been trusted with something that could stop them. Her breath caught in her throat. It felt like the ground beneath her was shifting. This wasn't just about information anymore. This was about action, about taking a stand in a fight she didn't fully understand yet. Where do I start? Sophie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Trust your instincts. You'll know when the time comes, the voice replied. Now go. The mission starts. The call ended abruptly, leaving Sophie in stunned silence. This was real. The stakes had just been raised, and there was no turning back now. Sophie's hands were shaking as she hung up the phone, the weight of the conversation settling like a heavy fog around her. She stared at the screen, the call abruptly cut off, leaving her with a sense of unease she couldn't shake. She wasn't just on the edge of something big anymore. She was in the center of it, and the deeper she went, the more she realized how dangerous it all was. Daniel's gaze was steady as ever, but there was an edge to it now, something she hadn't seen before. His lips parted, as if he was about to say something, but then he paused. The tension between them was palpable, thick with the uncertainty of what came next. We need to move fast, Daniel finally said, his voice lower than usual. You've seen what you're up against. These people, they're calculating. They'll make sure nothing stands in their way. Sophie felt her chest tighten. The pieces of the puzzle she had uncovered were starting to make sense, but it was all so overwhelming. Trump's name, the shadowy network of influencers, the strange symbols, they weren't just random connections. They were part of something far bigger, something that was already unfolding. And Sophie had been pulled into it. We can't let them get ahead, Sophie said, her voice firm despite the uncertainty clawing at her insides. I need to know what I'm walking into. I don't care if it's dangerous. I need to know the truth. Daniel gave a slight nod. You will. But there's more at play than just secrets. The people in this network, they control everything. They've got money, power, influence, and they'll stop at nothing to make sure their plans succeed. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about gathering information anymore. This was about stopping something that could change the world if they didn't act. And Sophie had just been handed the keys. "I'm ready," she said, her voice stronger now, the rising tension in her veins turning into determination. "Let's do this." Daniel's eyes softened, a fleeting moment of respect passing between them. "Then let's move." The clock's ticking. The world seemed to narrow around Sophie as they moved deeper into the shadows of the operation. The weight of her involvement in something this vast was becoming overwhelming, but the reality of it hadn't fully sunk in until now. She had never been one for politics, power plays, or anything even remotely close to the clandestine dealings she now found herself tangled in. Yet, every step felt like one she couldn't undo. Daniel led her through a narrow alleyway, the cold air biting at her skin. Sophie's thoughts raced. She knew they were getting closer to something big, something dangerous. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach. The clues, the documents, the cryptic calls, it was all coming together, but at what cost? As they reached a metal door at the end of the alley, Daniel turned to face her, his expression serious, almost apologetic. "You need to understand something before we go any further," he said quietly, his voice low enough that no one else could overhear. "There's a price to loyalty in this world. A price I don't think you're prepared for." Sophie felt her pulse quicken. "What are you talking about?" He hesitated for a moment, then continued, his gaze heavy with unspoken truths. "Once you commit to this, once you make this choice to go against the people who pull the strings, there's no coming back. They'll come for you. Not just you, but anyone you care about. And they'll make sure you know it." Her chest tightened. The reality of what she had agreed to, the decision she had made when she picked up that call, was beginning to hit her in full force. The danger wasn't just to her anymore. It was to everything she held close. The people she loved, her life, her future, all of it was on the line. Sophie looked at Daniel, the gravity of his words sinking in. "Then we have to do this right. We don't back down." Daniel nodded, his face hardening. "That's the spirit. But you need to be ready, Sophie. Loyalty comes at a price, and it's a price you'll have to pay, one way or another." The door in front of them creaked open, and Sophie followed him inside, steeling herself for whatever came next. There was no turning back now. Sophie stood at the edge of the room, her mind reeling. The walls seemed to close in around her, the weight of her decision pressing down on her chest with every breath. The air felt thick with the tension of what was about to unfold. She had come this far, uncovered so much, but this was the moment that would truly define everything. Daniel's voice broke the silence, but his words seemed to reverberate from a distance. "This is it. We move now, or we lose everything." Sophie could feel the urgency in his tone, but it didn't ease the fear that gripped her. She had been prepared for many things: danger, betrayal, the unknown, but nothing could have prepared her for the gravity of what was at stake now. The file she had sifted through, the call she had made, the name she had uncovered, it was all leading to this. But she didn't know who to trust anymore. Not even Daniel. "You're sure about this?" she asked, her voice shaking with the weight of the question. Daniel turned to face her, his expression unflinching. "I'm sure, but you need to understand something. What we're doing now is going to change everything. For all of us. There's no going back from here." Sophie felt the ground shift beneath her, the reality of their situation setting in. This wasn't just a mission anymore. This was a turning point, a choice that would affect not just her, but the lives of countless others. She thought back to the first time she had uncovered the truth, the moment when everything had seemed so clear, when the pieces had fallen into place. But now it wasn't so simple. Now, she had to make a choice, to continue down this dangerous path, knowing it could cost her everything, or to walk away and live with the knowledge that she hadn't done enough. Her heart pounded in her chest as she looked at Daniel, her decision solidifying in her mind. "Let's do it," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "Let's finish this." The air around them seemed to crackle with the weight of what was about to happen. Sophie knew, without a doubt, that nothing would ever be the same again. And for the first time, she was ready to face it. Sophie's heart raced as she stood in the dimly lit room, the final plan laid out before her. The clock was ticking, and every second felt heavier than the last. She glanced around, half expecting someone to burst through the door and stop everything. But this was it. This was the point of no return. Daniel stood beside her, his focus unwavering. He was calm, but Sophie could see the tension in his jaw, the slight tightness in his posture that spoke of a much deeper anxiety. They were about to face the full force of everything they had uncovered. The names, the connections, the shadows that had loomed over them. It all came down to this moment. The countdown had begun. "We move in 15 minutes, Daniel said, his voice steady, though Sophie could hear the undercurrent of nerves that betrayed him. She could feel the same rising tension in her own veins, the weight of what was coming pressing down on her chest. Every part of her was screaming to back out, to run and leave it all behind. But there was no time for second-guessing now. She couldn't undo the choice she had made. And even if she could, she knew she wouldn't. Her fingers hovered over the phone, ready to make the final call, the one that would set everything into motion. The target was in place, the leverage in hand. They were moments away from bringing it all to a head. But it wasn't just the network they were up against anymore. It was the entire system, the powers that had controlled everything from the shadows for so long. "We have to be perfect," Sophie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know," Daniel replied, his gaze meeting hers with quiet intensity. "But even if we're perfect, we can't control what happens next. All we can do is give them the truth. It's up to them to decide what they want to do with it." Sophie exhaled slowly, the gravity of his words sinking in. She wasn't just part of a mission anymore. She was the catalyst. And as the seconds ticked down, she couldn't help but wonder, would they be ready for what was coming? The silence in the room was deafening, the weight of their actions pressing down on Sophie's chest like a vice. She stood at the center of it all, the culmination of months of work, now teetering on the edge of success or failure. The phone in her hand felt heavier than it ever had before. The moment of truth was upon her, and all she had to do was make the call. Daniel stood by her side, his eyes locked on hers. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His presence, his unwavering resolve, spoke louder than any words could. Sophie could feel his tension, but there was something else in his eyes now, a quiet acceptance, as if he had already come to terms with the consequences. They had reached the point of no return, and they both knew it. Sophie took a deep breath, steadying her nerves, and dialed the number that would change everything. The phone rang, each passing second stretching into eternity. Her pulse thudded in her ears as she waited, the cold grip of fear tightening around her heart. She had no idea how this would end, only that they had come too far to stop now. Finally, the line clicked, and a voice on the other end greeted her. Sophie's breath caught in her throat as she spoke, her voice calm despite the turmoil inside. She gave them the information, the truth they had been searching for, the pieces they needed to expose the vast conspiracy that had been pulling the strings in the shadows. There was a long silence on the other end, and Sophie's stomach dropped. She didn't know what to expect. Would they take action? Or would they hesitate, like so many others who had stood in the face of power and done nothing? Then the voice spoke again, slow and deliberate. "It's done." Relief washed over Sophie, but it was fleeting. They had won, yes. The truth was out. The pieces were in motion, but it had come at a cost. She had sacrificed her anonymity, her safety, and perhaps even the trust of the people she had once held dear. But in that moment, as the weight of her choices settled, Sophie knew one thing for certain. Some victories were earned only through sacrifice. The days following the call were a blur, each one slipping by with a sense of purpose Sophie hadn't known she could feel. The world around her had shifted, irrevocably changed by the actions they had taken. The news had spread quickly, the ripple effect of their revelations reaching into every corner of the network they had exposed. The truth was out, and there was no turning back now. But even with the victory, there was a quiet emptiness inside Sophie. She had done what she set out to do, uncovered the lies, exposed the system of manipulation, but now she was left to grapple with the consequences of it all. The weight of the change she had brought didn't just rest on the shoulders of those who had been caught in the web. It rested on hers too. Every action had a reaction, and the price for this one would continue to echo in ways she couldn't yet understand. She sat at her desk late one night, the hum of the city below a constant reminder of the world moving forward while she stayed still. The headlines screamed with news of the scandal, politicians, CEOs, and high-profile figures scrambling to distance themselves from a mess. But Sophie knew better. This wasn't just about exposure. This was about transformation. The world would never be the same, but neither would she. Daniel's face appeared in the doorway, his usual composure softened by a rare look of vulnerability. "It's happening," he said, stepping into the room. "People are starting to listen. Things are changing." Sophie nodded, but her eyes were distant, as though she could still feel the weight of the decision she had made. "Change doesn't come easily," she murmured, her voice filled with the quiet resolve she had always carried. "But it's happening, whether they're ready or not." Daniel walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her in the moment. "And we did it. Together." She looked up at him, the corners of her mouth lifting slightly. There was no going back, but there was also no denying the truth they had uncovered. The echo of their actions would resonate far beyond them, throughout the world and in their own lives. And for the first time, Sophie understood what true change felt like. It was both liberating and terrifying, but it was theirs to carry forward. Sophie walked through the familiar streets, but everything felt different now. The world seemed both larger and smaller, as if the truth had expanded the boundaries of what was possible, while also narrowing her focus to the essentials. She had done what she set out to do, exposed the hidden forces pulling the strings of a system designed to crush those beneath it. But now, as the dust settled, she was left to rebuild not just the broken system, but also the pieces of herself she had sacrificed along the way. The call had shattered the illusion of safety, but it had also freed her. It was strange how something so destructive could bring about such clarity. But in the aftermath, she felt something she hadn't known she was capable of: reclamation. The person she had been before the call, before the investigation, was slipping away. But the woman she was becoming? She was stronger, more resilient, and more certain of her own worth than she had ever been. As she entered the building, Daniel was already waiting for her. His eyes met hers with quiet understanding, the burden of their shared journey reflected in his gaze. "It's all starting to come together," he said, his voice softer than usual. "People are starting to listen, Sophie. The system's breaking down. We've opened a door, and they can't close it." Sophie nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of their success. "It's not enough," she replied, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. "It's never enough. There's still so much to do." Daniel stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "One step at a time. You've already changed so much. We've already changed so much. The reclamation has already begun." Sophie looked out the window, the city sprawling beneath her. The battle wasn't over. It had never truly been about exposing the truth. It had been about shifting the balance, giving people the courage to reclaim their own power. She had started a movement, but it was up to the world to finish it. And for the first time, Sophie felt ready to watch it unfold. The morning light streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the room where Sophie stood, her hands resting on the edge of the desk. It had been weeks since everything had changed, since the truth had been exposed and the powerful forces behind it had begun to unravel. But the world was still turning, still moving forward, and so was she. Sophie hadn't known what to expect after the fallout. She had expected resistance, threats, maybe even a sense of loss. But instead, there was something else. A quiet peace, a stillness that had settled deep within her. The world was not fixed, not by any means, but it was waking up. And for the first time, she could see the edges of possibility, the outlines of something new beginning to form. She turned from the window and looked around the office, her space now feeling familiar in a way it never had before. The truth had given her a new sense of purpose, but it had also given her something else: freedom. the freedom to rebuild, to shape the future the way she had always envisioned it, even if the road to get there had been painful and uncertain. Daniel's voice interrupted her thoughts as he entered the room, his presence filling the space like it always had. He was quieter now, not because he had changed, but because their shared mission had shifted into something more complex. The world had taken notice, and the battle was no longer fought in the shadows. It was in the open for everyone to see. "It's starting, Sophie," Daniel said, his eyes meeting hers with a sense of finality. "The world is starting to take back what was stolen, and you were part of that." Sophie nodded, a slow smile pulling at the corners of her mouth. "We were part of it." She knew that the true work was just beginning. But there was no fear now, no doubt. The mission had grown from a fight for justice into something much more, something far-reaching. And as the sun rose higher, Sophie knew she was standing at the threshold of a new beginning. It wasn't just about exposing the darkness. It was about creating a future where the light could shine through brighter than it ever had before. Sophie stood at the podium, her fingers gripping the edges as she addressed the crowd before her. The room was filled with faces, some familiar, some strangers, but all of them were there because of one thing: change. They had witnessed the unraveling of a system that had long held power over their lives. They had seen the raw truth laid bare, and now they were here to witness the aftermath. She looked out over the crowd, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and quiet humility. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot, but they had won something important. They had started a movement, sparked a revolution in the hearts of those who were tired of being silenced, ignored, or oppressed. This wasn't just her victory, it was theirs. The world was no longer the same, and neither was she. Sophie's voice broke through the quiet murmur of the crowd. "This is only the beginning," she said, her words carrying the weight of everything she had lived through. "We've fought for truth, for justice, but most importantly, for something we all deserve: our freedom. The freedom to speak, to act, to live our truth without fear." There was a pause, a stillness that seemed to hang in the air, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Sophie felt the weight of her journey in that moment. Everything that had led her here, everything she had sacrificed. She had lost so much, but she had gained something far greater: purpose. A round of applause broke out, and Sophie didn't hesitate. She stepped away from the podium, not out of arrogance or pride, but because she knew this wasn't about her anymore. It was about the future, about the people who had found strength in the fight, and the ones who would carry it forward. As she walked off the stage, her heart steady, Sophie realized something profound. The legacy she had fought for wasn't just the truth, it was the strength to keep fighting, to keep rising, no matter how hard the world pushed back. The truth would always win, but it was the strength of the people that would carry it into tomorrow. And that, she thought, was the greatest victory of all.